This is a reverse engineering attempt for the virtual EMS at BYU Idaho site. This is a site for employees of BYU Idaho and students to reserve interview rooms, study practice rooms, and conference rooms. So I have here on the left the tables that I think the database for virtual EMS, what the tables that it has. So to start with, I'm already logged in, so I'll go over the users table. I would suggest that the users table have an ID to begin with, a name, and that's the student's given name, and then also a username and password variable, or rather, these are the columns, I should say, the horizontal row here. The username and password will be encrypted on in the database, and when the user attempts to log in, it'll compare the encrypted results of the plain text they entered for username and password, and if those match what are on the back end, then it'll allow the user to log in. So I'm already logged in. I'm going to go forward to create a reservation and justify the other column names I have for reservations and rooms here in my spreadsheet. So if I go to create a reservation and I select a study practice room, I'll enter in some time here and then click search to pull up the available rooms. So we have here a couple different rooms that are available. If I click on these rooms, I'll get some information about them. I think the table for rooms has an ID and then these IDs here for user, reservation, and rooms is a primary key. Room details, I think, is a string that is an object. So an object stored as a string, and it's either a JSON or an XML object, I think. The reason I think it's an object is because some of these rows don't exist in other rooms. So you have allow check-in X minutes before booking begins for this room, 108. If I look at 176, see, I don't have that same row in this table right here. So the reason I think that this is an object and that these rows aren't actually columns in the rooms table is because why would you send back just null, right? Like, why would you send back just an empty value? You'd have to have the front end check each time to see if that's null so that it wouldn't render just an empty row. So like for this one, for one of the ones that doesn't have this row would just show up as empty unless the front end checked for it every time. So it doesn't make much sense to me to do it that way. I would just send back a string that is an object that's stored as a string. And that object would consist of, for example, properties like room code and then the values, 108. I think the same of setup types because these have a different amount of rows and each one of these rows says something a little bit different sometimes. Same with features. Images, I think all are their own column in the rooms table because you can't store more than one image in a column or in a cell in the database. You can store images as blobs, and you can only have one in each cell. So I think there's 3 image columns, and I think just like I would call them image 1, image 2, image 3 if it were me. And then this is just another rendering of the calendar, so that's not something from the database. So then once I've selected a room, we'll select 108. I put in a number of attendees. So then we'll see here in the reservations, we'll move from rooms. We've gone over users and rooms, and we'll now move on to reservations. So in reservations, you have an ID and then a room ID, because you have to know what room the reservation is. There's a calendar view that shows all the different rooms and at what times they have reservations. I'll go back here so we can see that. If you look at schedule, you can see what time things are scheduled for. And so in order for this to pull, the reservations need to know what room that the reservation is for. Okay, so I'll go next step. And in here, we've got, I've already set the time start and time end. Oh, I should go over that. Time start and time end and time zone. Those are important because if someone goes to make another reservation, the database needs to be able to tell the website, wait a minute, that time start that they selected, it falls between an existing reservation. So you have to reprompt the user. They can't create that reservation. And so we have to know the time start, time end of each reservation and the time zone. And then I'm going to go back actually. Well, you can rewind the video. The dialog that pops up when I go to create the reservation also, it shows what kind of setup do you want. Do you want a conference table and chairs? Do you want a classroom setup? And that's for employees to know how to set up the room for the reservation. Okay, and then moving on, you'll enter in here in this form event name, event type, group, first contact phone, first contact fax, email, and so forth, so on and so forth. So I'll just put in some dummy data here. I'm going to put in placeholder 2, and I'm just going to put in a random number here. Okay, and then we'll create reservation. At least one room is required in the Rooms tab. Oh, I didn't pick a room. Okay, here's the setup type thing that I was talking about. And we'll set the number of attendees to 1 and setup type. Okay, and then we'll go to reservation details and create reservation. Okay, so then there's just a few more properties in this table that I would posit. One is status, so look at my events. And I've already created some earlier when I was playing around, but if you remember, the name of the one we just created was placeholder 2. And you can see here there's a status, so that must be stored in the database also. And in this case, it's just student web request. So then if we want to cancel it, there's 2 more columns that I think that this table has, and that's cancel reason and cancel notes. You can select this, just rescind request, and put in some placeholder text here, and that'll be saved to the database. If we just look at current, include, canceled, you can see the status has been updated to canceled. And that is my presentation on how I think that this website's database is set up.